my lord. What a freaking mess. Well, this is what happens when I get really involved in projects. The stuff tends to scatter all over my house, and it becomes like the #1 priority when there's stuff everywhere and I've got to get it done. Well, I thought I'd share with you guys an update on the which I later learned is probably closer to about 1845, Chauncey Boardman clock. Here it is. So I've made the decision as to which cabinet will be restored, or which case, and it's this one. This is the one that I started out with originally. And my God, have I learned more and more just by doing this than any other project I've ever started. Mainly about the history of American clockmaking, the materials used, the methodology. It's so cool. So, to make this happen, what you see is a very, very rough, very rough project that you're seeing. So, I'm not doing everything, or anything, I should say, the way that the average clock restoration person would do it. Mainly because this is the first one I've ever worked on. I'm really just learning here. This isn't a clock that I plan on selling at an auction for whatever. And the good thing is, excuse me, I'm just covering over a very bad cold in July. Anyway, what I want to point out here is that if you're going to work on clocks, or if you're starting out and you want something inexpensive and not really worth a lot of money, this is a good clock to start with. The OG clocks were made in large quantities, and they were inexpensive. They were like they were basically like the digital clocks of the 1840s and 50s. They made OG clocks. Several different clockmakers made these between the early 1840s, back when they were using wood mechanisms, all the way up until like the 1900s. This style clock is very common, and I believe there are even reproductions well into the 70s, the 1970s. What makes the OG clock so plentiful is that it was inexpensive to make. They used a high-tech, low-cost mechanism of the day, which was, this is your typical OG mechanism. This is a Seth Thomas clone. This is actually the one from that clock that's now in pieces. I'll get into that a little bit later. But this is a very simple 8-day mechanism made of brass. The brass mechanisms actually helped mass production, which is what brought the cost down. Even though they were more durable and they would last longer, because they weren't subjected to the woes of wood work mechanism, which they'd wear out and they'd be very susceptible to losing time during temperature fluctuations. The brass mechanisms were very inexpensive to make because they could be mass produced. The wood ones were done by hand, and it just took longer. This case is actually a carryover from the Chauncey Boardman shop during the woodwork mechanism era. This clock, or this case, would have at one time, if it had been sold earlier, it would have contained a woodwork mechanism. But it's an older design, and I'll show you a little bit about that too. But these mechanisms are a dime a dozen. This particular one is original to the Chauncey Boardman clock, but any mechanism from a Chauncey Jeremy or a Seth Thomas or any one of those other Connecticut clockmakers would fit this case, no problem. But it's good to know that we have two original Chauncey Boardman mechanisms. I know they're Chauncey Boardmans because Chauncey Boardman didn't mark his mechanisms early on with a maker's mark or anything like that. There was nothing identifying it stamped into the metal. I believe the name of the game then was just get them out as quick as we can. But he didn't sign them. He didn't put any hallmarks or anything on them. And the good thing is, because I have two, I can actually examine each one individually and look at what mechanism has the best parts, and then use the best components to make the final unit. Like, for example, there's a lot of slop here. This bearing should be drilled out and redone, but this one has a little bit less slop in it. So, and that's the exit trunnion or something like that for the escapement mechanism, the escapement wheel. They all have a little bit of slop in them, but ultimately some are better than others. One's better than the other. So we're going to identify which one is in the best of condition. Yeah, these things should really be rebushed. Absolutely. Both of them. But anyway. So, how to tell how old your clock is. This is pretty interesting. If the label is still intact, and this is actually the same regardless of who the manufacturer is, because many of them use the same printers for their labels. If the clock has an Elihu Gear, or maybe it's Gear, label, all you've got to do is look at the address for the printing office or printing shop, and that'll tell you. Now, this is 26 State Street. What I know about Elihu Gear from the basic internet search, use Google, it's great, is that he moved his shop several times, and based on the address listed, you can tell when the clock was made. So 26 State Street was, I believe, from 1844 till about 1847 or 1840. Yeah, 1847. The other clock had an address of 1 State Street, which is from 1847 into the 1850s. So we're dealing with, this is an older clock. Here's another dead giveaway. And it seems like whenever one company changed their design or changed their method of manufacturing, the others soon followed suit. So, if we take these two door frames, for example, you'll notice there's a huge difference between the two. I'm not going to make you guess, so I'll point it out. In this door frame, the glass was glazed in with glazing putty and glazing points. I know the glazing points are there because I had taken the mirror out of this one to replace with a new mirror, which is right there. I just had a new one cut at a local glass shop because both of my mirrors, one of them, the one that came out of this door, was too thick. It was a replacement mirror from about 1907, and it was about 3 times thicker than it was supposed to be. So it had excessive weight. But this door had all the glass held in by iron nails and furring strips. And you can tell that the furring strips were taken out at one point because I noticed that there were additional nail holes, but they were original furring strips. In about 1840, after about 1845, many of the clockmakers switched to using wood strips to hold the glass in. And I believe that was probably necessary to save cost of manufacturing and probably to save time, because you wouldn't need a skilled glazier to to install the glass. Anyone could do that. It also made the glass easier to replace. During the restoration process, I actually am going to glaze in the replacement mirror. I've made that decision. I even bought a thing of glazing compound, or glazing putty. So, when it comes to refinishing the clock case, this is a very controversial subject because everyone says don't refinish, you'll ruin the value, you'll whatever. I understand that. I respect that. In fact, if it were any different, if I didn't have to do all this piecework of, see, I've already had to replace 1, 2, 3 little pieces of veneer with veneer that was salvaged. By the way, you can reuse veneer. that was salvaged from that clock, which is why I disassembled that one, so I could extract as much veneer and nails as I could. The issue is, yeah, if I'm piecing in veneer from another clock that has a different color stain to it, I'm kind of have to do something about that. So I decided that I'm refinishing the whole clock in a red mahogany stain. It's a decision that I've had to make, and I'm going to be living with. It's just the way it's going to be. Doesn't bother me none. I had to I sanded off the sides a little bit just to see how it would look. I started with a piece from that other clock just to practice on, to make sure I wasn't going to sand through the veneer, because that can happen very easily. And I really liked what I saw. Nice, beautiful wood grain that I want to kind of expose again. It's a beautiful finish, and I want it to look good, because it's too nice to not do anything with, you know. This is a mahogany veneer, and it has a very nice wood grain to it. So this is going to be sanded on all sides except for top and bottom, because they were never finished to begin with. And it really sucked because this actually had that nice blackened patina to it. That I didn't want to lose that, honestly, but I didn't have a choice. I mean, that's just part of doing business, I guess. Yeah, you kind of have to live with what you got. And it's that blackened patina look that people go crazy for, especially when it comes time to appraising the clock. If that's still there, it really helps the value. Another issue of controversy is the type of glue that you use to put the veneer on after you've pieced it in. You know, people who fix clocks for a living would use hide glue. Hide glue is made from animal, I believe, tendons, and it's actually made in the same process, I believe, as gelatin. But it's made from animal connective tissue that's been boiled down, and it's an excellent glue. It's reactive to heat, so it can be repositioned or undone with heat, which it's actually how I was able to get the veneer off the other clock. You have to make it at home. You basically buy like a bag of granules of this glue, and then you heat it over a stove, and it turns back into a liquid form, and you apply it to the wood and then install it. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, when piecing in small pieces of veneer, you can use wood glue, and that's exactly what I've been doing. I used a wood glue that turns brownish color when it dries. It's Titebond 2. It's just a modern resin glue, I believe, and I'm only using it because I have it. You know, I'm not going to go out and buy a thing of hide glue just for this purpose. But if you're making structural repairs, I wouldn't use anything but hide glue, because hide glue is actually very strong. It's stronger than any modern glue, and it's great for repairing, you know, the actual case of the clock if you need to. So I mentioned extracting nails. Here's another little point I might want to bring up. So this is the door hardware that I'm going to be using. This is original door hardware latch mechanism. Here's the original key. Not original key, but it's a replacement key for my clock. It's the only key I have. These are the pulley weight covers. I'm going to be reusing these. These are reproduction covers, by the way. And this box-style cover is what this clock would have come with originally. The other clock, they made the pulleys smaller. That as they improved their design a bit, the pulleys were made smaller, and they started using flat covers like this. And of course, the flat cover can't go on this clock. So I have these. I'm glad I have these. I mean, you can buy them, but I have these already, and they're the box type pulley covers. So nails. Okay, I have a bunch of original iron nails that I pulled out of that clock case that I yanked apart. Because I wanted to make sure that when I finish this clock, there are no modern round wire nails anywhere. So I have a whole bunch of these. Now, these nails were not handmade like I originally thought. So in doing some research, I actually learned how nails were made back in the mid-19th century. These nails are actually made by a machine that would cut the shank from iron, and that would be done automatically. And then you would have to form the head by hand. So it would form the shank, and then you would have to pound the head into shape by hand by heating the nail over a fire and pounding it into position that way, which is pretty interesting. Before, I think it was the 1790s, nails were made entirely by hand, and there are ways to tell, how those nails were made. There are ways to tell that I don't know how to do it, but whether or not those were, But in around the 1890s, I think it was 1890s or 1880s, they started making nails from wire, which are like what modern nails look like, and they're round. That's what here's a good example. This is a modern round nail. I'm going to take these nails out, and they're going to get replaced with 4 of these little iron nails for authentic. I don't know which nails I'm going to use. I think these might be fine. I got a couple of those. Of course, they're all different. No 2 nails are exactly the same. But these are getting replaced with iron nails. That's kind of what I'm going for. So I'm going for a semi-historically accurate, amateurish restoration job is basically what I'm doing here. This isn't historically accurate by any means, but it'll be serviceable. And and I have a theory that history doesn't end when the clock is restored. We're just halfway through the clock's life, maybe, and we're just getting it ready for the next half of its life. This clock, if I finish it correctly, will be around long after I'm dead, and it'll still be an antique 100 years from now. And what I don't understand, with the way people restore antiques these days and the way they treat them, it's like history ends the day you acquire it, and now it has to be restored back to its original, everything has to be done exactly historically accurate. But I don't really believe in that much, because let me show you what I mean. Right here, in this book, I'm actually using this book to flatten things. I have this piece of paper, this document. This is actually going back into the clock, and this is a timeline of all the service history and everything that was done to it over the years, including signatures and dates as to who worked on the clock. Now, the clock was cleaned on 9/14 of 57. Now, that's 1857. In 1865, J.E. Dearborn, 9/30 of 1865, serviced the clock. In March, I don't know if that's 05 or what, 1867, by W. Adams. So this is like a timeline or a history of this clock as it's been used and serviced. And my name and signature is going to go right here with the current date. Cleaned, serviced, restored, whatever, 2014. History doesn't end in 1933. It doesn't end in 2014. It's going to continue on. This thing will be around for maybe another 100 years, another maybe 200 years. And my point is, the work that I do today, using modern materials, will become part of the clock's history. it's I hope that came across right, because that's exactly what I mean. I mean, it doesn't end the day the clock is made, or 20 or 30 or 50 years after. It continues on. Time marches on. Materials change over the years. You know, I can't do everything the way they did in in 1850 or 1840. I can't do that. So I also have in this book all the veneer pieces that I need to restore the front lower part of the case. And these are being flattened out in this book, which is working quite well. So when these are ready to be used, they'll be pre-flattened, and all I have to do is clean the hide glue off of them with rubbing alcohol before I finish the clock. So that's going to be... So I want to talk a little bit about preserving history and building upon that history. It was actually... I didn't really realize that I wasn't the only one who thought this way until I saw an episode of Restoration Home, I think it was. It's a British TV show where they take these old manor houses and they restore them. And it's a very interesting show. And what they do is they take these houses, and these houses that are 500, 600, 700 years old, and they restore them. But they don't restore them entirely historically. So I just noticed a major problem with my plan. This is a serious problem. As it turns out, and I just as I'm making this video, I noticed it. This is how recent this development is. But these mechanisms are not the same. They are not the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. If you notice, the winding pegs on this mechanism are drilled center to the frame. The winding pegs on this mechanism are drilled off to the side. I don't know why that is. And then I noticed, just now actually, that there's, I don't know why these rivets are here. But I'm afraid that I won't be able to use parts from this mechanism as I intended. There must be some difference in the frames. Let me grab. Okay. So I mean, there may be some parts I probably can use, but okay, 3 1/4, 1, 2, 3 1/4, and 2/16. 3 1/4. Okay. Okay, I think I see the difference here. 3 1/4. No, same width, same plate width. Okay, but these are spaced differently. 3 2/16. 3 1/8. So 3 1/8 there, and just exactly 3 inches there. So they've changed the width of the peg distance for some reason. Now, whether or not that means any tooth counts have changed, I don't know. But what it really means is I probably won't be able to use any components. I can't mix and match them. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I don't know. It doesn't look good though. I mean, in all seriousness though, this mechanism is still good enough to use. I don't know what all these little nail or hammer marks are all about, but it looks like they both have it. So that could have been from the factory, from when they were building the mechanisms, and they had to make little adjustments to them. I'm assuming that's what that's all about. But they're not the same. So I'll just probably have an extra mechanism. I mean, it'll fit the clock, but because of the spacing difference, I'm going to have to use a different face. So I think I'm going to use this mechanism instead, and I'm just going to try to drill out where the severe rivet issues are. Or if someone who knows how to, who does clock repairs can explain this to me. I think what they were doing is they were closing up holes with chisels to make them fit the shaft better. And that's why these little marks are in there. If someone could explain that to me, I'd greatly appreciate it, because it doesn't look right to me. The biggest problem I have with this mechanism here is that these gears can run out of alignment. This is really the only real problem. This gear has way too much slot back and forth, and it can easily come out of mesh with the I think it's the hour or the second hand, the hour hand. No, the second hand, the minute hand gear. I don't know all the terms yet. I'm learning, okay? But anyway, that's an easy fix. All I've got to do is probably throw a bushing in there, or maybe bend the mechanism down. It seems like that's what they did back in the day. They would just bend the mechanism, or bend the plate back to reduce the amount of side-to-side movement. See, right now it's out of mesh. So there's just too much play here. I can fix it though. I mean, it's not that big a deal. I'll do what I have to. Probably bend that in a little bit, and that'll fix it. Oy, 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 oy. Yeah, this rust wasn't here when I put the mechanism together, so that's just moisture. What I'll probably do is maybe coat it with some fluid film during reassembly. I don't know. I'll figure something out. Okay, just a quick little update here. I sanded the face of the clock's veneer just to see how this would all blend in. And yes, you can still see the wood filler there, but that I think will, I mean, the likelihood of its visibility will go down when it receives its first coat of stain. So, I'm really anxious to see how that turns out. This piece, I don't know why I didn't get it to fit. So this is actually a terrible fit. This one's not so bad, and this one's pretty good. But this one gave me some trouble. I may end up redoing this piece if staining it doesn't make it look better. Now, I mentioned that I had all these extra nails from the other clock, and there's a reason for that. What I did was I re-nailed the entire backing. I didn't take the back plate off. I probably should, but I didn't. I went ahead and I tried to nail it using the period authentic correct nails, the iron square nails. I pre-drilled holes all around it, and I added like 5 or 6 nails. Because when they built this clock, they used nails very sparingly because they were probably very expensive. And, you know, that's not really an issue anymore. So I added a nail. I can't even tell which ones I've done, actually. That one I added because there's a split right here. This wood is completely split. So I put a nail here because this wasn't supported by anything. I put a nail here because there was nothing supporting it there. The wood was kind of loose. I added a nail here as well. Same thing over here. Actually, that one has been there for a while, but this is the one I added here because this corner was kind of loose. As the wood has aged and dried out, you know, it's cracked and it's not as tight as it once was. having those extra nails just gives the clock a little bit more stability or rigidity. So I'm hoping that that works out okay. But yeah, as far as this is it. We're learning about woodworking, and that's what this is all about. I may end up chiseling off this corner and redoing it because obviously that doesn't look so good. But you know, I'm not really into making this clock look like it just came off the wagon. I'm really just trying to make it look decent, you know, again. And I think that's entirely within the realm of possible. So, just trying to make it look good again, you know. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a really bad cold. I actually am getting ready to cut a 1/16 inch thick piece of pine to put down here. I don't know what the original wood would be. I can't really tell what the I don't have the skills necessary to tell what species of the woods are. I just know this is mahogany veneer. That's all I know. I believe the whole box is made of pine, yellow pine. That's all I know. So I need to make a 1/16 inch thick piece of filler material to be glued along this along here, and that is to provide backing for the veneer that I'm going to be replacing down here. I have all the veneer. It's sitting in that book right there. So once I add that in there, I'll glue that in place. I can add the veneer. The original piece of wood was cut right about here. Someone tried to repair it, and this is why there's filler here. There's a knot that actually came out of the wood, and it's necessary that there's something here to provide, you know, good support for that piece of wood. So I've got to add more filler here, but once I add that, you know. So the way they faced the clock is they added a 1/16 inch thick piece of something all the way around the frame, and then they applied the veneer on top of that, and that's how they did it. And that was to give the clock some depth. They could have alternatively, and maybe they did in later years, but they could have just made the frame 1/16 inch of an inch thicker, or yeah, and then just did that. But I don't know. They did what they did. Okay, so just to see how this stain would work, I applied a light coat by hand using a rag, which I believe is the correct way to apply stain, on the clock's sides and face, just to see how it would look. The color is perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for. And it turns out that the wood filler that I used, it actually takes in the stain quite well. So you can't even see the wood filler unless you get up close to it. But this is a piece that I patched in. This is the one I was really worried about. I didn't think it would look good. I still have to hand sand the whole thing, and the OG molding especially, where some of the steam from the iron really did a number on it. But once I sand this off, make it look nice, you know, put a coat of stain on it, it'll look great. But here's the other piece I patched in. And this is because there were gouges on the side. So to fix those gouges, I had to you know, do some reconnaissance work. But anyway, I have to sand the side of this actually all the way up and down because this sticks out a little bit. I'm gonna do that by hand with high grit sandpaper, like 220 or something. And then this piece, I can't even see it anymore. I wouldn't know it was there unless I really looked at the grain. But this is the piece that I patched in, and it kind of matches where they had joined two pieces at the factory. You can see that even then they were joining pieces of veneer to cover the entire clock. Remember, this was not an expensive piece in its day. This was a very inexpensive clock. You know, this is something that a farmer would buy. You know, or just an average person working in a factory would have bought this. So, just got, again, I got to finish the bottom here. But I'm pretty satisfied with my repair work. I chose, instead of cutting out a piece of veneer, I used wood filler, because I figured if I put a new piece there, it's just going to chip anyway. So I put some wood filler in there, and I stained it, and it looks pretty damn good. Same thing with here. I probably should redo that one. This side came out okay. It'll need another coat, maybe a light hand sanding first, but ultimately it'll need more stain. But we're on our way. So once that fully dries, you know, I'll give it a nice light sanding. So take a look at this. This is actually the mechanism support that I've sandwiched between the two older ones, and I've glued. Because there was a crack in this piece, I had to glue it back together again. So I sandwiched and clamped it, so that way it'll cure nice and hard. So things are looking good. So I've begun the process of sanding the OG molding. It was kind of scalloping a little bit, and I was able to sand it down. I mean, the veneer isn't loose, but it was kind of cracking a little bit. But I got that all out. I mean, it looks pretty good. Getting it ready to be finished. I sanded the stain off already. I'm going to reapply the stain. I also sanded down the corners a little bit to hide some of the minute chips and any loose veneer that might be coming up at the edges. And then I'll do another hand rubbed finish on top of that. I've mounted the clock mechanism movement stays, and those are again, I drilled out the holes and used original iron nails to affix those. I've got to make a few modifications to the mounting plate and make sure that everything is lined up correctly before I box it together. But that's coming along nicely. I'm going to bring a piece of wood to my father's and cut it down on the table saw to 1/16 of an inch, or as close to that as I can get it, and then I'll plane it down by hand to the desired thickness. So that way I can finish all this. I gotta apply more putty there to give it a nice surface to glue down to. But I finished one aspect of the restoration, and I'm quite proud of this. The door is now finished. Let me move my feet so you can see. I have hand rubbed the stain finish onto the door frame, and I've glazed in a brand new mirror. The mirror is the only piece of this project that is brand new. Everything else is recovered, except for obviously the stain and the glue. But all the veneer and wood pieces and nails have been recovered from another clock. In this case, I had to buy a new mirror. I had no choice. Because the new mirror is a little bit thicker than the original glass, because the old glass was so thin, I had no choice but to open up that slot a little bit. It actually slides into this slot on the top, and I had to open that up a bit to provide clearance. This is new, modern glazing. I would have preferred to use linseed glazing, but I can't buy it locally, and I don't want to mail order the stuff. So this is modern oil-based or petroleum-based. I don't know what it's really made of, but it's not linseed oil like the original would have been. And it doesn't have that nice, dark, aged look that the original stuff had, which is now a nice, dark brown. And it will never harden like the original did. It's not supposed to harden like that. This stuff isn't anyway. It'll actually harden up a little bit, but it won't get to be the same consistency or rock hard finish as the old glazing. And true to my word, I have kept the original backing paper from the old mirror, which has all the signatures and names of the dates of the service history, including my own. I added my own name to it because I have every right to. 140 years from now or 170 years from now, people are going to be looking at it and saying, oh wow, I wonder who this guy was. But full restoration, July 2014, Bennington, New Hampshire, and then my signature. So that'll stay with the clock as long as it shall be around. And I was going to glue it to the mirror. Excuse me. I was going to glue it to the mirror originally, using a low-tack adhesive. I decided against it because if the mirror were ever to crack, then this would be completely wasted. It would crack along with the mirror, and you would never get it off the back of the glass. So I I just glazed it in with the mirror as it was originally, and that's how it's going to be. Also, instead of using 2 glazing points, I think they had one here and like one somewhere over here, I have 4. I have one here, one here, one here, and one here. Even though these 2 are completely unnecessary, they help hold the paper in place. But the door is done, ready to be mounted up. Let's see how it looks. I'm going to be very gentle here. When it's finally mounted, that's what it's going to look like. I like it. I like the finish. I'm not going to use any shellac. I had toyed with the idea of shellacking the finish, and I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm going to leave it, and then I'll use like tung oil or something on it to keep it shiny. So stay tuned.